Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the California ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Variable Operations and Maintenance Cost Review 2023 stakeholder meeting. We're going to discuss the final proposal and draft tariff language today. My name is Caitlin McGee, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group here at the ISO, and I'll be helping facilitate today's meeting. I'm also joined by Kevin Head, Senior Market Engineering Specialist, and Sarah Kozel, Counsel for the ISO. As a reminder, the presentation and agenda for this meeting can be found on the Policy Initiatives webpage under the Stay Informed tab. Before we begin, a few housekeeping reminders for today's meeting. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We try to structure these meetings in a way to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, but we do ask that you keep your comments professional and respectful and try to refrain from repeating what has already been said. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment today during the meeting, there's a few ways to do so. If you're connected to audio through your computer or using the Call Me option in the WebEx platform, you can click the raise hand icon in the bottom right toolbar. If you're joining us through an audio-only line, you can press #2 and that'll add you to the queue. Or if you prefer, you can put your comment or question into the chat and I will read it aloud on your behalf. When making your question or comment, please remember to state your name and affiliation beforehand. And if you need any technical assistance during today's meeting, please send a chat to the event producer and they'll be able to help you out. So here's the agenda for today. I'm going to hand it over to Kevin in few seconds here. He'll walk us through the final proposal. We'll have a bit of Q&A, and then Sarah will take us through the draft tariff language as well, and we'll have opportunities for Q&A as well. And we'll wrap up today's meeting with next steps. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Hey, thanks, Caitlin. Appreciate the introduction there. As she mentioned, my name is Kevin Head. I'm a Senior Market Engineering Specialist in the Market Analysis Group at the ISO. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to join us this morning. Hoping this can be a pretty quick call. The final proposal didn't have much change from the draft final proposal. We've only got a few slides to move through, so I'll just move through the deck and then open the questions up on the final proposal aspect of this call before I turn it over to Sarah. So in summary, the ISO is proposing to update the default variable operations and maintenance costs by adjusting them to be 18.73% higher than the currently effective values. In the draft final proposal, we had proposed to use a 16% inflation increase, which was the change in price levels between December of 2019 to December of 2022. But based on some stakeholder feedback that we got, we are using a more recent inflation adjustment reference point. That's how we got the 18.73% increase because it's now based on June of 2023 price levels rather than December of 2022. The next slide has a little bit of background. Variable operations and maintenance costs are key inputs into our market. What we call variable operations and maintenance adders, or VOM adders, or how scheduling coordinators reflect those costs in the market. And the actual specific mechanisms that enable that are the default energy bid, which is used by most resources, and it's used to replace their bids if the resource is mitigated during the local market power mitigation process. And the default commitment costs, which are sort of bid caps on commitment costs such as minimum load costs and startup costs. So VOM adders are really just one component of both of those, the default energy bids and the default commitment costs, in addition to other costs such as fuel costs, grid management charge, et cetera. There's two types of VOM adders. The first is what we call default VOM adders, which are predetermined values that resources get assigned based on the resource's fuel type or technology type. But if those default values are in any way insufficient, the scheduling coordinator can reach out to the ISO and negotiate a resource-specific value that's different from the default values based on the resource's actual costs. The ISO is only proposing to update the default values in this initiative. The negotiated values won't be changed because they're sort of already have been agreed upon. And in that way, the negotiated values serve as sort of a backup if the default values are in any way insufficient. The next slide has some stakeholder feedback that we got. We heard from Salt River Project and appreciate them submitting their detailed comments. Highlighting a few of them here. The first is that they requested the ISO to perform more frequent reviews of the default VOM adders, for example, on an annual basis. Currently, the ISO looks at these once every 3 years. We think that 3-year horizon is still appropriate. It allows for enough time between the initiatives for stakeholders to kind of, get a feel for how the defaults are working and negotiate any if they need to. And, it also doesn't put too much burden on the stakeholder community or the ISO having to go through, several rounds of feedback, go to the Board of Governors and also to FERC. So we try not to overwhelm you guys with too many stakeholder initiatives. And in any case, as I had mentioned, the negotiated option exists if the existing default values are inadequate. And those negotiations can happen anytime. They don't have to be on a triennial basis. In terms of their second comment that we wanted to highlight, there was a request to use a more forward-looking indicator of inflation rather than one that's based on historical inflation rates. And if that's not an option, they requested that the ISO use a more recent inflation reference point than the one that was included in the draft final proposal. In terms of the forward-looking indicator, we believe that, because of the uncertainty of future inflation rates, particularly considering the Federal Reserve's actions in increasing interest rates, we're not even sure if that will happen. And we're not sure how those higher interest rates will impact the broader economy and how quickly inflation will come back down to more normal rates. So, we're just trying to be a little cautious about the future inflation rates. So we feel that using a historical value is more appropriate. And so we do agree with their request to use a more recent historical inflation reference point, and that's what's reflected on the next slide. So wouldn't mind going to that next one. So as I mentioned, we are going to change the reference point from June of 2023, or from December of 2022 to June of 2023, which is an 18.73% increase. And on the left, you'll have the currently effective values, which are by different technology types and fuel types. And the post-updated values on the right table, which is reflective of that 18.73% increase. Just a reminder that the values aren't going to work out to be exactly 18.73% different because they're rounded to 2 decimal points. So we did the formulas behind the scenes and then rounded to the nearest set. So that's sort of it from the perspective of the final proposal. We are targeting a potential implementation date of December 1st, but that's pending, of course, joint approval by the CAISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body and approval by FERC. So just wanted to make that clear. But I think I can open the call up to any questions, comments, concerns at this point. Do we have anybody in queue or any?
I did get a comment in the chat, and just a reminder, if you do want to ask a question, you can click the raise hand icon at the bottom right or press #2 on your audio line. But so far, we just got a comment from Michael Souza with LADWP just stating that they're planning on reviewing MMAs every year, and they feel that 3 years might be too long, and the upwards-looking CPI may only seem to benefit the California ISO. But I don't see any other questions at this time.
Yes,
there are
thank
no
you.
questions with you at this time.
Thanks, Adri. And thanks, Michael, for those comments. We'll take them into consideration, but yeah, we encourage folks to negotiate as frequently as they need to make sure that their bids are accurately reflected in the market. Thank you.
All right, so let's move to Sarah, and she'll walk us through the draft tariff language.
Thank you, Caitlin. I am going to share my screen here so that everyone can see the Word document that we posted. All right, Caitlin, can you see that?
Yep, perfect.
Great. So I'm actually going to skip this first section for a minute and just jump down to section 30.4.5.4.2. This is where we actually are listing the dollar values for the variable operations and maintenance adders. So this is the first change that we're making to the tariff. It's very straightforward. It's reflecting that increase that Kevin was describing. And so the tariff does incorporate the dollar values into the text itself. So you can see those here. There's also a spelling error. That's what multiplied is changed. So this I think is the most straightforward change. Like I said, it's just reflecting those updated values. The second change that we've made is in a few different places in this tariff record. It's first in the general section, 30.4.5.4.1. And this is where we're describing the effective date of the existing language in the tariff. And we're proposing to remove that language from this section. And I'm going to scroll so you can see it's also in the language section we were just discussing where the dollar values are, gives the effective date of January 1st, 2022. And then lastly, it is, apologies for the scroll. This is the much longer section, 30.4.5.4.6, describing conversion of existing negotiated values. So we are just proposing to delete all of these, this language that one describes the effective date of January 1st, 2022, and second, that describes the conversion from these prior negotiated values. This language was included in the last round of updates to the VOM adders, where we were moving from this negotiated framework to these default values. So this language is no longer relevant. We now have these default values, and in this case, all we're doing is updating the dollar amounts for those values. So we no longer need this language about how that conversion took place. I will also note that though we're removing the effective date of January 1st, 2022 from the tariff itself, we are not proposing to add a new effective date to the tariff. That's pretty standard across most other tariff provisions, where instead we request the effective date from FERC through our tariff amendment filing. And then when we get a FERC order, that effective date lives in the tariff record itself and not in the text of the tariff language. So that'll be, again, kind of conforming to how we treat effective dates elsewhere. This language with the January 1st, 2022 was included here because we needed an additional time for this conversion from the existing process 2 rounds ago to the process that's currently in place. And with that, I will pause for questions and slowly scroll up here.
Give it a few seconds to see if anybody raises their hand or puts something in the chat.
And I'll also note that often we do request comments on the tariff language in advance of the tariff language call. We did not do that in this case because the policy and the tariff were fairly straightforward. So the comments that we are requesting both on the final proposal and the tariff language, so there'll still be an opportunity to comment on this language in that forum as well.
All right, well, I don't see any comments at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Caitlin.
All right. Any final comments from you, Kevin or Sarah, before we close out today's meeting?
None for me. Thanks, Caitlin.
All right. So again, thank you for joining us today. Short and sweet meeting today. We're going to ask our stakeholders to submit comments using the commenting tool on the initiative webpage. The deadline to submit comments will be September 14th. And that comment template and the materials for today's meeting can be found in that link there on the second bullet point of the presentation. And then our CAISO staff expects that we will present this at the Board of Governors and WEIM governing body as a joint decisional item on September 20th. And then if you have any questions or need help getting set up in the commenting tool, please feel free to contact us at isostakeholderaffairs@kaiso.com. And again, thanks for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Conference has concluded. You may now disconnect.